Hello! This video will show you how to create a thermometer chart using Tableau. Alright, let's go ahead and get started then. The data that I'm going to use to create the thermometer chart is the world values dataset. This is a large dataset that is collected across the world, and it has to do with a variety of different values that people hold. I'm going to be looking at 3 questions here. Question 51 on this survey, which has to do with food insecurities. So the question is, have you gone without enough food to eat? And they can ask on a scale from 1 to 4, 1 indicating often and 4 indicating never. I also have questions about going without needed medicine or treatment, and then also, have you gone without safe shelter? So there's 3 questions here, question 51, 53, and 55, off of this survey that's going to be plotted. So here's what a thermometer chart looks like. Okay, I have this for different regions of the world here, and we just have the stem part of the thermometer here, and then the outcome. And the higher up I am on this scale would indicate that I do not suffer from, say, food insecurities, if that's what's being displayed here. If you're low on the scale, then you often suffer from food insecurities. Okay, so let's take a quick look at the data. Here's what the original data looked like. I have some demographic information about the different countries, and then the questions. And then I added the world region variable here to this data set. I had to do a join because I wanted to do my summaries across the different regions of the world. So the data processing step involves obtaining an average, for the data values here. So the average survey outcome. I'm doing that for food, medicine, and shelter for each of the world regions here that I have specified. I did pull out China and also the United States. So those aren't really world regions, they are countries, just to highlight those as well. The other thing that I needed to do is to add a scale column to my data, and this is just contains the lower and also the upper endpoint of the thermometers. So that column had to be added to the data set after the summaries were obtained. Okay, so let's move over into Tableau and show you how to create one of those thermometer charts. All right, so here I have Tableau with the data as I've just discussed. Okay, so I have Africa here is the world region, the label here is food, and then the data value, which is the average. And then I have the 1 for the lower end of the thermometer. I have that same information with a 4 for the upper end of the thermometer. All right, so let's go over to sheet 1. Let's name this sheet thermometer and get started to create, our visualization. All right, so I'm going to want to do this across world regions, so I'm going to put that in the columns box. So that's going to start dividing that out for the different regions of the world. I am going to need to obtain a couple additional items here, and the first is a bin variable for scale. So I want to create these bins here for each of those. So I'm going to right-click on scale, create, and then I want to say bins here. And I want to set the bin size to be 1. Okay. Go ahead and say OK to that. And then the other thing I need to do is to create a calculated field. So just do a right click, say create calculated field here. And I'm just going to call this index, which is simply going to be an index or a counter for each of those world regions. Okay, so just index is the name of it, and then the function that I'm using here is index open paren, close paren, which again is just going to give me the values 1, 2, 3, 4 for each of the world regions. All right, so let's go ahead and now, after I have index created, put that up in the row. Don't worry about the graph that's being created here. I just need to go through some steps in order to get the thermometer stems. So I'm going to pick up scale bin here and drag that into the rows box. I'm now going to change the mark type to a line. I'm going to take the scale bin now and pull that off and put it on the path icon here. So that's going to create the different paths. Okay, I'm not quite done. The last thing is from my index pill here, I need to select compute using, and then I want to select the scale bin variable. That bin variable that I created just a moment ago. And then that's going to do it. That's going to give me the stems of my thermometers here. So you can see that I 1, 2, 3, 4 here. That's just that index variable that was created. All right, so now I want to actually plot the data. So I'm going to pick up the data here, drop that into the rows as well. And that's going to create a second chart for me. We're going to end up collapsing this onto a single one here in a minute. But you can see that the values here are well beyond the range of 1 to 4, and that's because we're using a sum. We're actually summing across 3 different questions at this point. So if we go back here and look at the data, the sum is actually being done across food, medicine, and shelter. So 2.9 plus 3.59 for Africa. So that's why that value is so high there. So I want to change that to an average instead of a sum. And again, under my measure, average there. Now I'm ready to collapse the two. So under my pill for data, I can say dual axis. I'm going to want to synchronize those two axes so that they line up with one another. And now at this point, I can do things to control the size of those dots. Under my data, okay, under my average data pill here, I'm going to want to take off line and say shape. And then I can use a filled in shape if I want. Okay. Let's go back and see if we can get the kind of the orange toned down a little bit, maybe use a lighter gray. So let's go under the index. So those stems there are being created due to index. So I need to go under that tab there. I want to take off measure names there based on color, get rid of that. And now I can control that to a lighter gray there. I can do things like set the scale here on index. It really should go from 1 to 4. It's going from 0 to 5 here, so let's go ahead and do that. Edit axis, fixed from 1 to 4. I can get rid of the grid lines here, so let's go ahead and do a format. And then up here under my lines, I want grid lines to be none. Under rows there, none, there we go. So I need grid lines, and then under rows, say none there. And then I can probably get rid of the left side. I don't really need that at all. So that's going to be under index there. I can deselect show header. The other thing, actually I want to add a couple things. So I want to bring that show header back a moment. I want the show header here on the right side as well. What I'm going to do next is go back to bringing the question in now. So let's bring label up under columns. So now I have Africa here, kind of in its own pane here. All right. And then I have food, medicine, and shelter going across there. And then I go Asia, and then I have food, medicine, and shelter. So I am using the enclosure principle there, Gestalt principle enclosure there for these 3 lines here, or these 3 dots here. Let's go ahead and add just some reference lines, and I want to do that based on the data here. So let's do a right click on this right axis and say add reference line. And I want to do a reference line across the entire, so I want the average of all of the dots. So that would kind of be an average response from these 3 types of questions. So I'm going to select entire table here. So I'm under the add reference line. I'm going to select the entire table, and you can see that that average then gets snapped across there. I can take the label, so I can see here I have a label there. If I want to take that off, I can just say label none, and that goes away. I can tone down the color, right, and things like that. Formatting of that line here. So this here, that would be a bold, and this would be a thinner line there. Okay. So that's giving me an average of each. If I also want to add in an average for each region, I can do that as well. So let's go add a reference line. And here I want to select per pane. So a pane here would be this enclosed area for Africa. The enclosed area for Asia would be a second pane all the way across. So I want to do an average per pane. Don't want a label on that, and then I'm going to maybe do a dotted line, and again kind of a light dotted line for each of those. This is kind of scrunched. I have some open space over here. I can fix that by, from here I can say entire view. So from the drop down here, standard, fit width, fit height, and an entire view. That'll stretch that all the way out for me. So we're getting a little closer, I think. I can do a couple more things. I don't really need these scales anymore, so let's take off show header on each of those. Maybe I could color by the different world regions. So pick up world region and drop that onto the color. I want to be doing that though on my data, right, on my dots. So let's do that. And I think a little bit of sorting might be relevant here as well. I think Oceania here, which includes things like Australia and New Zealand, is the highest, and then it goes to China. The lowest, I think, is Africa here. So right now the world regions are being sorted alphabetically here. Let's do the sort by how high the average is across these three questions. So I can do that by selecting world region up here and saying sort. And what I want to sort by is a field. So right now it's alphabetic. I want to actually sort by a field. And it is smart enough to do the field name data, which is, it's using a sum, which I would want to select an average. And what it's doing is lowest to highest, and I just want to flip that so that the left-hand side is the regions of the world where there was less insecurities, and then as we move to the right, there's more insecurities. So I think that's a little bit easier to see what's going on. The other thing is I have this food is higher than medicine is middle, lowest, excuse me. Food is middle. Medicine is lowest on each of these, I think, if I look across there. And the shelter one is highest across there. So I can do a sort on that variable if I want by just selecting the label, doing a sort. And the same idea. I want to use the field there. I want the average, and I want it to be in descending order. I don't need the color coding. I can hide that. I think this is getting pretty close to something that we could look at. I could probably get rid of my label up here, or my title, or fix that. So here you can clearly see that the trend is going down for many countries there. So shelter is the first one there, and then food, and then medicine. So people tend to have the least amount of insecurity when it comes to shelter, and the most amount of insecurity when it comes to medicine or healthcare. Okay, so we can clean this up even more, and actually I'm going to have you do that for a task. We can maybe put some, it's kind of hard to see the labels across the bottom, so maybe we could fix those up. We could make the labels even across the top a little bit bigger. Maybe make some of these lines darker and The different panes here could maybe be cleaned up a little bit as well. Okay, so that'll do it for this video. Thank you.